Hi, and welcome back to Continual. It's time to strap on the six shooters and get ready for high noon. We're here to talk about our classic Westerns. I'm your host, Jim Nettles. And before we go too far, let's see who all is riding into town with this little posse. Paige, you're up first.
Hi, I'm Paige L. Christie, and I write feminist westerns with dragons, contemporary fantasy, and an assortment of other chaos.
Susan?
And I am Susan Griffith. I'm the one half of the Clay and Susan Griffith writing team. I write historical fantasies, but we are also branching out into westerns, weird westerns mainly, but westerns all the same. I've been a fan for a long time.
Jenny?
Hi, I'm Gini Koch. I write the Alien Catherine Kitty Cat series for Dog Books. I also write under a variety of other pen names and in all lengths and genres. And as A.E. Stanton, I write novels set in the Old West, weird westerns, and post-apocalyptic fiction in an Old West setting.
Jay?
I'm Jay Smith. I am a podcaster, audio drama producer and writer, and sometime occasional storyteller. I produced a series of survival horror, which is a kissing cousin to the Western genre.
And Jean Marie?
Hello, I'm Jean Marie Ward. I write fiction, nonfiction, and everything in between. This year, I have a collection of my short fiction coming out from Ginger Blue Publishing, which doesn't have any westerns in it. But next year, there will be The Adventures of Oleander Jones, which is an alternate universe, Wild West, emphasis on the wild.
So I remember growing up, and throughout my entire life, my dad has always been a huge fan of Westerns, right? He reads Westerns, the old TV shows, all the old movies, you know, all the old serials, you name it. I have probably seen the horse hose run backwards because of how they filmed it. So Paige, where did you get your first love of watching Westerns, reading Westerns, diving into the genre?
I can't remember a time when westerns weren't in my life. I grew up with parents who had shelves full of books, and one shelf was westerns. And Saturday morning on TV, there were westerns playing, and my parents were watching them. And it was movies and TV shows, and The Lone Ranger, and High Chaparral, and The Rifleman. And as far back as I can remember, westerns have been in my world, and I've always loved them. I've never tried to dissect why. I just enjoy.
Susan?
Like most young girls, I was obsessed with horses. Became, quite focused on them in many ways. So if it was not watching TV with horses in it, it was reading books. I scoured my library, got hooked into I think it was a Louis L'Amour book at the time, and just never stopped. And it was just one of those things that if it was a cowboy and a horse on an Indian on a TV, I was going to watch it one way or the other, whether my parents wanted me to or not. I would sneak down and watch a Western, even if I wasn't supposed to. So, I got into the characters, I got into the period, and would just continually research it, even as a young child. So
Westerns are wholesome all the way around.
Exactly.
Mostly. Jenny?
Wild Wild West. It's the first Western I remember watching. I fell madly in love with Jim West and Robert Conrad at the same time. And I fell in love with everything about it. Books wise, we're related to Zane Grey somewhere back there. I think he's like a second cousin. And everyone in my family was embarrassed about him. They had one book, which I assume he had sent to my grandmother, right? As a, hey, look, I'm published. Wouldn't you like to read it? And she kept it. And it's Robber's Rooster, Rustler's Rooster. I don't remember which title it was. And I read it, and they found me reading it and snatched it from my hands. Like, you shouldn't be reading that trash. And then they put it back on the shelf, and I waited, and I went back in and got that trash and read it. And I remember thinking how unfair it was that they seemed to think that his writing wasn't good, because it was really good. So that he sparked my love of reading about the Westerns. And Robert Conrad's part of my love about watching them.
Jay, how about you?
I came into it a little late. I grew up. My first experiences in film and literature were the science fiction classics. I was a Star Wars kid, but I grew up in a household that was full of radio drama, so you could not escape Western tales. So anything with Jimmy Stewart in it, my dad listened to, and there were some Gunsmoke was everywhere, and I kind of liked Gunsmoke, but for the most part, to be a cool kid, they were all derivative and old fashioned. So I didn't really pay attention to it until my brother took me to see Silverado in the 80s, and it blew my mind. Lawrence Kasdan's cinematography, that opening sequence, and then opening up the titles to the Big Canyon and the Great Beyond was just so mesmerizing. And the storytelling and the characters just drew me in. So being an obsessive kid, I had to consume everything after that. So I dusted off all the old cassettes my dad had, started listening to the old radio dramas, and I didn't get too much into the books because, like Ginny, that was trash men's adventure fiction. And so it didn't have a lot of stock around. You should start with cultured European fiction, which frankly has a lot in common with Western literature in terms of themes. But I really was captivated by just the intelligence of Silverado, the vivid imagery that kind of dispelled that stereotype of the classic black and white Westerns being hunky white guy saves the world every week at 8 on ABC kind of thing. So that was my first experience.
Jean Marie?
Okay. I didn't like them. I grew up in the 50s and 60s, early 60s, where basically, as Paige said, you turned on the TV. There was a Western TV show on every channel. They were on the reruns. They were this, that, and the other thing. And to make matters worse, my father looked like John Wayne. And my mother went to every movie that John Wayne did. And in the 50s, his movies sucked. And frankly, the only thing that I liked was Roy Rogers in the Saturday mornings, because A, pretty horse. Hey, yeah, we all love horses. B, he had a wife, and she played a role, and she wasn't always getting rescued and all of that stuff. And even then, it was very important to me because let us just say that retiring females do not have any place in my family tree. My one aunt who did all that stuff was roundly despised by my father, who I adored. And we only visited her because mother insisted. So we went to Germany, and then I came back, and there was Wild Wild West. And it was, oh my God, this is actually fun. And and my dad had been talking about Maverick, but I was too young to really understand Maverick when we were there before, but it was running on reruns. And it's like, oh, hell. And Samantha Crawford is my girl. And then we got the James Garner movies, support your local sheriff, support your local gunfighter. And it's like, yeah, whoa. Mm-hmm. And then finally, as I'm an adult, my husband, of all things, the guy who loves Wagner, introduced me to the Westerns of John Ford and Howard Hawks. And it was like, oh, this is talking about so many things that this is a whole different world. And of course, meanwhile, in the movies, you're starting to get things like Clint Eastwood, A Fistful of Dollars, A Few Dollars More, and then leading up to Unforgiven. And it's like, oh, the crap that was on TV. I don't know. No, this is this is a world. This is a different world, and it can deal with issues. And it is, as Jay said, not just hunky white guy saving the world every week with a 6-shooter, which is ridiculous.
It wasn't all crap. I'll defend some of the old stuff. They weren't all crap.
No, there is some that what I saw struck me as crap. And so then, there are a lot of reasons why I've continued to seek out some of the older movies and revisit some of the movies and the TV and the better TV shows that were out there. But that, I think, comes up in a later question.
So let's just sort of start working down our path here. So Susan, I'm going to start with you on this one. If you look at all the plethora of Westerns that are out there, books, movies, TV, whatever makes you happy, what is your one favorite? If somebody says, I want to see a Western, start me on it, where are you going to start them?
Good question. It depends on what they like. That makes a big difference. What I like is not going to be the same as what Gene likes. I mean, that's just the way it goes. If they're of the same mindset as myself, I would probably point them to Laramie. I really liked that show and the feeling that it had. I like the two best friends, plus the kid and the stagecoach waypoint. And yet they still had some really great personal stories that I liked. And they made a nice job of giving you a little bit of what raising a kid and needing a mother and how they had to bring all that in because they were completely ill-equipped to do it. So there was lots to plumb there, and it was a very long run series, not like Gunsmoke or anything, but it had a nice arc to it, which I really enjoyed. I would think that would be a good starting point for them. If they like weird stuff, then Wild Wild West. The early stuff, just to make sure that they know before it get really too tongue-in-cheek towards the end. But I really would like that. In terms of film, Magnificent Seven, that was one of my first ones that first opening sequence when they got to take the man up to Boot Hill still sticks with me. Every single time, that's the one piece that I love rewatching. And I like the thought of 7 people coming together to, protect something that is a great theme and storyline in the West. So those are mine. Do I have to go into books too?
That's up to you.
Oh, okay. Books, I would probably do Lonesome Dove, just for a real true taste of what I think the West was like, with a myriad of different characters, and just some really hard-hitting and shocking bits, if they're into that.
All right, Jenny, how about you? Where are you going to start somebody?
I am going to start them. I was very tempted to say Silverado because it is really one of the perfect Westerns, but I'm going to go with Tombstone. In the same year Tombstone came out, with Kurt Russell, Kevin Costner did Wyatt Earp. I'm an Old West expert due to those books that I was writing and still do. And Kevin Costner's is incredibly historically accurate. Very, very accurate. It's also 3.5 hours long and essentially kind of boring. Okay, versus Tombstone, which is not historically accurate, but is a much better movie. And it really just grabs you. It makes you want to be there, which is what a Western should do, in my mind. It should make you want to be there, not be so relieved you're not. Okay, because dentistry, penicillin, and air conditioning are really big things. And they had terrible dentistry, and they had no penicillin and no air conditioning. So it's, like Val Kilmer said, he knew why Doc Holliday was so angry. He was wearing a full three-piece wool suit in the middle of the Arizona desert in summer. You're ready to kill everyone. Okay. So totally get it. But Tombstone is a fabulous movie. Honestly, that year, both Val Kilmer and Dennis Quaid, who both played Doc Holliday, Val in Tombstone, Dennis in Wyatt Earp, their performances were fabulous. And I just decided I never cared about the Academy Awards because neither one of them was even nominated for Best Supporting Actor. I felt both of them should have been nominated and Val should have won. And that they weren't was just like, oh yeah, was it not highbrow enough for you people? So anyway, so Tombstone for me is pretty much one of those perfect Westerns, even though it's not 100% accurate by any stretch of the imagination. If we're going for somebody you want music, I go for Rio Bravo. I love that movie. It's John Wayne, Dean Martin, and Ricky Nelson. You got two crooners in this movie, and they both sing. But it's also got a really great Western plot. And the point of the film that I think gets lost a lot of time is not actually can they defend themselves. It's not the romance. It's not all this other stuff. It is the redemption of Dean Martin's character that is the absolute emotional core of this movie. And I just love it for all of that. It's really good. If someone says, what Western should I read? Pick up any Louis L'Amour. Okay. He redefined writing Westerns. And I've had friends who are like, oh, Louis L'Amour, do I have to? I'm like, yeah, you do, especially people I'm mentoring. And they'll be like, oh my God, this is just the greatest. How is it? I'm like, well, that's why we know his name. Okay. It's because he's good. And I think if you want to read a Western that is what Westerns are, because like Susan said, Lonesome Dove, that's a novel set in the Old West, and it's different. Novels set in the Old West are different from Westerns. And I agree with her. If you're going for a novel set in the Old West, that's where you go. If you're going for a classic Western, Louis L'Amour, all the way. And television, of course, I'm going to say The Wild Wild West, but there are other shows. Bonanza was probably the one I picked for a television show. Long running, really good cast, did their best to be accurate. They weren't, but so if I have to pick TV and not a Weird West TV, it would be Bonanza.
And considering Bonanza was on for forever.
It was on very long. That my father-in-law was the best boy grip on that show. So that whole side of my family is super grateful that Bonanza was on so long because Dad had a beautiful steady paycheck and almost never went on location.
Jay, how about you?
A lot of my friends come to me and ask that question because their first exposure to Westerns was Yellowstone. And so I invite them to watch Silverado first, just to watch their faces when they can see that Kevin Costner can emote. Right. He is just so full of joy in that movie, and it's such a contrast to what he's doing in the last 20 years. But it's also a Whitman sampler of great Western tropes to just enjoy 2-hour movie that's really simple. But also, I go with Jenny. The Tombstone, I will ask a friend to watch it by themselves because they can't sit next to me because, like Ghostbusters, I will be going, that's not right. That didn't happen. That's cool, and by act one, they're telling me to get the hell out of their house. But I will say, don't do Wyatt Earp. It defies Kasdan's record of doing really cool, really animated and interesting stuff with, like Jenny said, a 3-hour slugfest.
2.5 hours. Don't forget that extra 30 minutes.
Oh God. Yeah, that's true.
What it is good for, it's a student of the Old West. It's a great movie.
Oh yeah.
It's very educational. It's very accurate.
And that's a big question. A lot of people come to me and it's like, well, which should I watch? And I'll know them. It's like, Tombstone. Yeah, 90% of the time I'm like, treat yourself to Tombstone. And unless you're coming to me with questions about it historically, I'm going to say, Wyatt Earp's way down your list. If it's somebody who is into weird fiction, I would say High Plains Drifter,
Mm-hmm.
because that's a wacky one. That is one that I enjoyed watching because it's got that spaghetti western savagery with the surrealism, and you don't come away from that unchanged. It's one of the darker westerns that I really enjoy. And if it's somebody who just wants a Silverado type straight up story, good characters, simple plot, Magnificent Seven. I love that the gradual introduction of characters and the assembly of the plot, simple plot. It's also very accessible for somebody. And if it's somebody who's looking for something a little bit more meaningful, kind of like the Tyler Sheridan level of interpersonal conflict, I'll go Man Who Shot Liberty Valance or Unforgiven, just because there's that complexity. So it's also like we're Western sommeliers in terms of what are your tastes? You know, how complicated is your palate, and what are you willing to accept? But as far as television goes, there are so many channels on Roku and MeTV that spin the wheel. Because even if you pick one show, there are really crap episodes. There are like seasons that are just slugfest to get through. And it's very hard to pick out a gem that's representative of what makes Wild Wild West great, or Bonanza, or Gunsmoke, or How Gun Will Travel. I'll just say go to the menu, and if the blurb hits you and you like the image that they provide, if it's a hunky white guy, then go for it if that's your thing. But there are I think the more contemporary westerns I would recommend to them, just because if they're coming to me from Yellowstone, they're looking for something that reflects the kind of themes that Taylor Sheridan is putting into that franchise. And I won't even speak to books because I'm not qualified.
All right, Jean Marie.
Okay. Well, if it's me, hands down, any Maverick with James Garner, period. And that goes to, support your local sheriff and support your local gunfighter. If you're talking, which Western would I recommend that basically encapsulates the best movie making? I would go with Stagecoach. The original. And I am not a fan of John Wayne, either as a person or as an actor.
Boy, he was pretty in that movie, though.
Well, he was very pretty in that movie, but it was the movie itself is so it deals with so many human issues in an unforgiving environment. And yes, unfortunately, the indigenous peoples in this are basically just the ocean and the old man and the sea. And that is a flaw. But if you talk about the humanity of the people and what they're going through and who the good guys are and who the bad guys really are, it's, the complexity of that. Another one that I adore for its complexity in terms of the humanity of it. Again, you've got, these are products of their time, and at this time, everybody in Hollywood seemed to believe in manifest destiny and our right to take over other people's lands. But Red River, by Howard Hawks, and if again we're looking at sommeliers and curating for people.
Do you want the orange dust or do you want the brown dust?
Yeah, well, there's that. But if you're looking for things that are dealing with current issues and viewing them through a different lens, as you get more, as you get further along, you get things that are more to people's current taste, whether it be Yellowstone or Unforgiven, or because they are dealing with issues in a way that is more familiar to them. Because all of these, the great ones, Silverado, etc., are every movie's a reflection of its time. And, you have to go more modern to get a more nuanced view of what was actually happening in the West. Books, I'm sorry. I never could get into Louis L'Amour. I never could get into Zane Grey. But give me Elmore Leonard writing the Old West, and I will read through the corpus in less than a month. And I have read through it in less than a month, but that was years ago, and I don't want to start it again because I'll start it all over again.
All right, Paige.
Wow. So much that I love. I am a huge Silverado fan. I have gone back. I've probably watched that opening sequence 1,000 times because it's so brilliant. And that's where I fell in love with Scott Glenn and anything with Kevin Kline. I mean, come on, it's Kevin Kline, right? So love that movie. I would say though, I kind of fell for some stuff that's kind of overlooked. The Big Valley, as far as TV shows go, because Barbara Stanwyck as the matriarch, you know, she's got a husband and 3 sons and a daughter, and the sons are always getting in trouble, and she's cracking the whip and wearing pants. You know, I love the Big Valley because who doesn't love Barbara Stanwyck, right? Mm-hmm. So that one was super fun. Movies, another obscure one that very few people have heard of that I adore. It's Gene Simmons, not Gene Simmons. What is her name?
Jean Crane?
No, Simmons is the last name. It's not Gene. Oh. Anyway, but Gregory Peck, Charlton Heston, Burl Ives. It's a movie called The Big Country.
Oh, yeah.
And it's an unusual twist on a Western in that you've got a sea captain, Gregory Peck, who falls in love on the East Coast with a woman from the Wild West, or, you know, late Wild West period, goes back to marry her to her family's ranch. And they all keep telling him he's going to get lost because it's a big country out there, but he's a sea captain. He knows how to navigate, but none of them believe that he can. And he just, it's this delightful, kind of farcical, fun piece. Not a lot of depth there, but a really good time. I really enjoy that all the time. I'm a huge fan of The Outlaw Josie Wales, which is based on the book Gone to Texas by Forrest Carter, which is a whole other issue if you get into Forrest Carter.
I haven't read that one.
Oh, yeah. It's great, but there's issues with Forrest Carter. But that's a favorite by far, that movie. It is so funny. I know it's not supposed to be funny, but I laugh all the way through it. That's a great one. Other books, I'm a huge fan of Max Brand. Frederick Faust writing as Max Brand. Specifically, my favorite trilogy would be The Untamed, The Night Horseman, and The Seventh Man, which are just fantastic. The character development, the character arcs in those books are mind-boggling. Hello, Ivan. Coonhound. I fell in love with those stories. Plus, there's a fabulous horse in that book, and being the horse crazy girl with 300 briars in the closet, I'm right there with you. So definitely that, and then a Louis L'Amour novel. I was never a huge Louis L'Amour fan until I read The Lonesome Gods, which is basically about the early settlements of Los Angeles in California, but with a supernatural twist. That was my first weird Western. It's kind of interesting. And it's a big fat novel. It's not the skinny Louis L'Amour books. It's a big fat novel, which kind of makes it stand out. So definitely all of those. I had one other that I was going to talk about, and it flew right out of my tiny head, but I'll probably remember and come back to it. But yeah, I think for me, so much of it is about when I find interesting characters that kind of break outside the stereotypes of what you think of with a Western. Like, I don't need the cowboy coming to do the high noon thing. But I do like those different twists. Like High Plains Drifter is another one of my favorites. And I remember what it was. There is a documentary called Silent Hill Unearthed. I can't remember if it was on Prime or Netflix, but it's the town that's closest to the Silent Hill Cemetery from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And it's a bunch of kids that grew up watching the movies and knew that the cemetery was there. and they grow up into adults and they set out to find the cemetery and they restore the cemetery from the movie.
Oh,
And it's a great documentary. It is so much fun. But yeah, it's called Silent Hill Unearthed, and it's well worth the watch. It's very, very fun.
Growing up, I mean, I grew up on a lot of, the Rifleman. I grew up on Zorro. I grew up on Lone Ranger. Yeah, I kind of grew up on a lot of these. Also grew up on some of the musicals, the Roy Rogers, all that kind of stuff that you got out of a lot of the different Westerns. I was much bigger fan as I got older of the spaghetti Westerns, Clint Eastwood, Fistful of Dollars, all these kinds of things. And it's always an interesting study to me of how we pick a lot of the classic tropes and then throw them at the Old West, right? How do people respond to different things? How do we deal with the fact of an unforgiving and often, barren land and eking a way out of it? Sometimes it's the mining town, all the different tropes. So Jenny, what is your favorite Western trope and what's the one that you never want to see again?
I think my favorite Western trope is that bad men or women will do what's right if they're really the only option. I like that trope. I like that trope a lot. I don't think it's real. Okay. But I like that trope in Westerns, that you have a Clint Eastwood character who is always a bad guy. Okay. Except in Outlaw Josie Wales, where we understand why he's doing what he's doing. In all the spaghetti Westerns and on, he's just coming into town and there's death behind him and you know it, right? But he stops because their needs either align with his needs or someone in there breaks through that crusty shell just a little and it'll help. And then he's going to leave again. He's not going to stay. I like that trope a lot. Again, I don't think that's real life, but I don't care. I'm not watching this for real life. I'm watching this for enjoyment. And that's one of my favorites. I'm sure there are others, but I really, I don't know who that stranger was, but he sure done this town some good. Okay. And then he rides off into the sunset to wreak havoc somewhere else. But this town's been saved by him. I like that. My least favorite is, there's a lot. Well, my least favorite is that, honestly, historical inaccuracy. I'm not even gonna try. Historical inaccuracy drives me nuts. Again, because I learned all of this. Winchester 77, Jimmy Stewart. Love this movie, right? But I'd only ever caught the last 2/3. I never, ever caught the first third of the movie. Whenever I found it on television, it was always somewhere between the start of the second act or the end, right? So we're in there. So for one Christmas, my husband and daughter buy me the DVD for Winchester 77. And through the entire first act, I'm sitting there like Jay, screaming, "That's not right. That's not right. Oh my God, are you kidding? That's not right. That's not right." So now I will only watch it because the second third, 2/3 are great. It's a wonderful Western. The first one is ridiculous. It's 1877. And where? Oops, an old man. In reality, he's 27 years old and doesn't have a reputation yet. So, Jimmy Stewart's like, well, I wouldn't have drawn him if I'd known it was Wyatt Earp. Well, it's not, because that's just complete. So I hate that because it isn't hard, especially today. It is not hard to do an internet search. And honestly, it wasn't hard before. All my research came from books out of the library, books and books and books and books and books and books and books. This information's been out there about the West for decades. All you had to do was open up anything and say, what year was Wyatt Earp born? Okay, he can't be something that I could rant for the next day and a half on that. So that's the trope that bothers me. You can't be bothered to check your facts, even the my easiest found fact in the world, you don't bother to check it because darn it, you want this. So,
writers never let a good fact get in the way of your plot.
You know what? That's okay in Tombstone because they got enough right that it didn't matter. But when you literally start your film in 1877 and the ancient old marshals in town are Virgil and Wyatt. I think Virgil's 30 at this time, right? Wyatt is absolutely only 27. And they're acting like, oh, well, they've got a reputation. No, they don't. Not yet. Okay. Oh, my God. It's just flames out of the side of my head.
All right, Jay. What's your tropes?
I got to stop going after Ginny because mine are pretty much aligned. I love tales of redemption. I love it when a hero with baggage goes through an adventure and does the right thing. The morality drama of good westerns that a solitary person finds family through doing the right thing kind of trope. It's always entertaining for me. Sometimes it's done well, sometimes it's not. But when Clint Eastwood does it, it's usually better most of the time. I'd say like High Noon and Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, people who stick to principles and strong ideas for the greater good at their own expense. Those are great tales that counterpoint the stuff I don't like, which is probably the stuff that prevented me from liking Westerns in general, which is that studio-driven, mandatory American exceptionalism in all of the Westerns that were produced early on that said, you got to have a hero that promotes American ideals and they can't have flaws. The men are men. If they're not white, then they're supporting characters who look up to those ideals, and no problem can be solved by anybody but the hero with the help of a trusty sidekick with weird quirks and a woman who loves him. It's just constantly done. And it's probably why it's hard for me to recommend anything on television, because that's all it was over and over again in different themes, the same trip. So I would say it really comes down to if it's strong writing, whatever the trope is, I'm for it. You could even do that American exceptionalism as a satire, and I would be there for it. But straight up, if it's just an ulterior way to send a political message, that's fine. I've heard it. I'm 53 years old. You cannot put the pill in anything and get me to not taste it. I will see it regardless of how small it is. But that's basically it.
Jean Marie?
Well, mine is a variation on Jenny's and Jay's. Okay. The thing that I like about Westerns is not so much a trope, but the undercurrent. That this is a new place where you can reinvent yourself to be who you want or need to be. And you can do this spectacularly well, or you can do this spectacularly badly. And this always resonated with me because military brat, you reinvent yourself every 3 years. Well, that identity didn't work too well. Let me try this one. And to see that depicted on the screen, even if it was in the corners about, the ladies of easy virtue who become, the town stalwarts, that was cool. The thing I hated, and this is why I have a real problem with most 1950s movies of any stripe, is that the only people that could have adventures, the only people who could accomplish anything, this is getting back to what Jay just said, was a particular kind of white guy. And, I'm white, but half of that equation passes me by completely.
Paige?
Well, I was going to kind of follow on what Jay said with the redemption arc. I really have always enjoyed that. And I like it when you're not sure it's complete, which a lot of Westerns do really, really well. It's like, is has that happened? Is there redemption, or are we just on to the next adventure that may or may not complete this cycle? That little level of mystery that I always find in westerns has always entertained me. Coming to mind, Jack Schaefer's Shane, not the movie, the book. Interesting, told from the point of view of a child, a little 10-year-old boy who meets, this mysterious stranger, comes into his parents' life as a farmhand, and who is he really? And you never know. You never find out who he is. And is he redeemed or is he not at the end? Does he even live? I mean, who knows, right? And straight up, Pale Rider is a straight up rip on Shane. It's a straight up remake with Clint Eastwood. So there's that one. And the thing that I think has always bothered me about westerns, even as a little kid, is the native people as the evil savages. Never was a fan of that. Even as a child, never made sense to me. I'm like, well, you're riding through their home. What the hell? Of course they're gonna. Yeah, I never understood it, even at 7 and 8 years old. So that manifest destiny part of it has always bothered me. So yeah, that would be the thing that I like the least about the westerns, is the villainization of the people who occupied the space for thousands of years. Yeah.
Susan?
Yeah, a lot of what's been said is very true. For me as well. I mean, I love a redemption story. I also like when people band together. I think that's why I like Silverado as much, and Magnificent Seven, and it's just and even Tombstone, there's people coming together to solve the issue. So that's an easy trope for me to always love. I think what would annoy me the most, and what has annoyed me the most, is again the misrepresentation of both women, Indians, the Native Americans, the Spanish, the Mexican. All those have always been, they're always vilified. They're always either gone to one extreme or the other. One of my favorite series was The High Chaparral, and that was the first time I saw and fell in love with Manolita as my first non-white hero when I was younger, and completely I never even noticed that they were different. And I loved his family. I loved, I think it was Frank Silva played his father, it was hilarious. I loved the wife, Victoria. I mean, there was just so much, and even all the hands that were on the ranch mainly were Spanish and Mexican, and it was such a veer off from what you're normally witnessing. I mean, yeah, there's John Cannon. He was the big white guy, but he was around. It was mainly the people on the ranch that I focused on. So it was nice to see that. It was refreshing. It was something different. Was it the best made? No, but it was fine. But those kind of misrepresentations has always, even like as Paige was saying, it's, even as a young person, you knew something was off. You knew that didn't make you feel right. At least for people that have some common sense and some emotions, that you knew something was off about that. But there's I always get tired of the woman of ill repute. All women have to be prostitutes in every film, and then they're redeemed at the end. It's very frustrating, especially from women watching westerns. We never got anything, and there were so many incredible people, incredible women out there. Mary Fields, the stagecoach driver that was like the post, would deliver the post. She was amazing, and you never get her story. I think she finally made an appearance in, I think it was the Anson Mount story, Hell on Wheels with the railroad. She shows up like out of the blue, and I'm like, why isn't she the main character? That's who I want. Instead, there's a woman who's a prostitute, of course. But I was like, it's so frustrating that we don't, as women, get a representation beyond the stereotype. So those are some of my most annoying tropes that I probably will just ignore or not watch.
Well,
and don't get us started on Westward, the women.
No, not even saying it.
Well,
Oh, God.
one of the things that strikes me about westerns, even going back to some of the earliest ones, 40s, 50s, looking at these stories, was how many of them would incorporate that supernatural element, whether it was because of that notion of the land, the notion of the natives, the notions of spirituality, whether or it was just the weird things that happen out in the desert. And that is one of those things that, to me, even in quote unquote straight up westerns, we still see a lot of that influence making it in. And I think that's really what sculpted a lot of the love, I think, today of the weird western. When we look at things like Wild Wild West, yeah, there were the gadgets and the tech, but it worked its way in there. We saw it work its way in classics like Bonanza. We start talking about the spaghetti westerns. That was a common theme in a lot of those, that nature, even if it wasn't necessarily overt, there was a lot of it there that was still there. It was part of the undercurrent of it. I think that's one of the things that's always been fascinating to me about that notion of westerns, is that notion of the other, a place that's a bit alien, a bit foreign, a place and a time that was, now not quite in living memory, but almost, right? We have the early days, we have pictures, we have these things that give us just that taste and storytelling that came out of that. So, Jay, what is it for you in terms of, is there a favorite weird western, something out of that period of time that really does speak to you? And what is it about that quote unquote, whatever that quote unquote weird aspect would be from the period of time? You're on mute.
I guess the go-to would be Wild Wild West. But as I think about it,
The Will Smith movie, right?
Yeah. We shall not speak of that travesty here.
Did they actually make that? I thought that was canceled and buried in soft peat. No, I don't think that exists. No, I think Wild Wild West as a series was entertaining, was great, had great ideas. I liked it as when I started seeing it on my television and getting the VHS tapes. But I found more contemporary examples of doing it well. I mean, High Plains Drifter, again, is one that drew a lot of supernatural elements, and it draws on the history of the West, that no one can agree on exactly what happened at any time in any place. And if you get enough people together, a story will naturally take on a supernatural element, because if somebody agrees on something that happens and they can't decide on a cause, spirits did it. It's the nature of the West and being isolated from what you grew up with as normal. It just becomes, a regular story takes on that supernatural element. And it's the uncertainty of the truth that is probably the most unsettling supernatural element in a lot of the spaghetti westerns. Like, the nature of evil becomes a supernatural degree of evil. And it's akin to post-war German noir. After the First World War, there was so much poverty and squalor and destruction and death that writers of that era were speaking of it as though only a very angry God could do something this heinous. So they were starting to apply supernatural concepts to the evil that men do. So if dialing down the intellectual BS, it really comes down to shows like Briscoe County Jr., which is probably at the far edge of this conversation in terms of what is a classic chronologically, that just said the hell with it. We're doing Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones has a lot of Western tropes. We're just going to throw anything against the wall. We're going to do Wild Wild West, but we're going to do James Bond. We're going to do Indiana Jones, and it's going to be cool. The other one that I was thinking about when you were talking, Jim, was Winona Earp, a show that kind of is too close to our time than to be classic, but I think the Bo Smith comic book sort of not so much, but the television show, in terms of its themes, while I'm sure Ginny shares the twitchies of the historical inaccuracies of that entire series, they integrate supernatural elements, a almost a Lovecraftian mythology behind the Wild West that I love, because I'm all about the Weird Western, but I'm all about Lovecraft horror and and straight westerns. So combining all that together is probably the best example I could give.
Jean Marie?
Well, I agree with Jay on all three, but I am going to throw down for Briscoe County because of a line that had nothing to do with the supernatural. It's when Briscoe's companion, who, alas, his name I have forgotten, is looking at Briscoe's Philistinism and says, "Man, don't you know nothing? Baccarat is clear. Lalique is blasted. Lalique is frosted. Don't you know anything?" And I mean, that just made the whole TV series for me.
All right, Paige. I know how you feel about the weird westerns. And you're on mute.
Well, I was going to say my own are pretty spectacular, but never mind that now. Again, as far as the thing I always come back to is Max Brand's the first book in that trilogy I love so much, The Untamed. There's an overtone of supernatural in that book that haunts me to this day. There's a musicality to that book. Literally the character whistles, and the whistle is not of this earth. It calls to different things and it signals different things throughout the book, and I just adore it. Again, High Plains Drifter always, but I have always felt like westerns in general have otherworldly supernatural overtones because as they're presented throughout all their presentations, there is a mysticism and a nostalgia and a longing for something that probably never actually existed that comes through in all the westerns. And that to me has always given it that that mystical edge. Westerns to me have always been just enough outside reality that I feel like most of them go there. Though in recent times, one of my all-time favorite Western moments, and it on TV, and it's not an entire series, it's one episode in the series. It's the episode Frontierland from Supernatural, where Dean goes back in time and he dresses in all his TV trope Western clothes and gets back there, and he's all gung-ho to be in the Old West, and then nothing is what he thought it was going to be. And he's there hunting Samuel Colt and a phoenix. Okay, I love that episode. So the West tends to slip into a lot of TV shows, that trope, that vibe, that longing for that place in time and space that probably never really was. I think it has always been part of the Western, but those are samples of things that I think really have always stood out for me.
Susan?
Yeah, I started my Weird West love very early. I think the first Weird West thing I ever got was, I think, Turok's Son of Stone comic book, which was Indians and dinosaurs and just weird supernatural stuff. And once I got hooked on those comics, I needed to know more about where the supernatural or the mysticism came from. And there was a lot of horror in Westerns too that I really kind of I didn't watch a lot of horror when I was young, but we know it's, once I got older, and since I married Clay, who's a horror buff, those kind of things really kind of seeped into my repertoire. So there's like shows like Brimstone, and I can't remember some of the others. Even the most things, Valley of the Gwangi. You just get a lot of the weird stuff when you're a kid. That kind of stuff was very intriguing. I remember there being an old series. I think the author's name was Logan Winters, about a wizard in the Old West. It was called Spectros, and it was a series, and I completely gobbled it up as a kid. When I got older, it was a little bit, you kind of veer away from the campiness of it. But there's a lot of incredible magic in the Old West, and just in the land itself. I mean, if you've ever just wandered in some of those regions where you're so isolated, where you're so at the mercy of nature itself and its inhabitants. I mean, it's otherworldly in a lot of ways. You go walking through Monument Valley, or you go walking through some, white birch or aspen grove in the middle of nowhere. It can really, the sounds of it, everything, and you really start believing that there's something else out there besides, than just man. And it's very evoking. So there's a lot to be said when Westerns kind of pull those tropes in and those elements in, because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there in the Old West, or in those regions at that particular time, that could tell you some stories that would just lift your hair up on your arm. I mean, stories of the Wendigo or Wendigo, that's all stuff that came out of those periods and out of those regions. So there's a lot of horror and mysticism in that area.
And I'm going to jump back in and mention the weirdest thing that's going on right now on TV, in my opinion, which is Outer Range.
Oh yeah, that's a great one.
What the heck? I mean, I have watched both seasons and I have no idea what's going on, and that's saying a lot. Yeah, that's about as weird as you get in a Western landscape. That, and the cinematographer is absolutely in love with putting the Grand Tetons in every damn scene. What's up
I've
there?
always started that. I'm now sad to know that I'm not going to get any answers, apparently.
If you figure it out, you call me.
I haven't seen that one yet. All right, Jenny.
Okay, well, as someone from Southern California and Phoenix, I can absolutely say that y'all shouldn't still go wandering around, because the desert is very unforgiving and it doesn't like us. It will definitely take someone who doesn't know what they're doing and didn't come out with water or a map or a compass and make you very, very sorry you wandered. There is no gold in the superstitions, just FYI. So really don't go looking. I think it's fascinating, though, that the two that for me are the best in terms of paranormal, no one has mentioned at all in this whole thing. The first one is Clint Eastwood's Pale Rider. Anytime someone says, "Oh, what do you think of paranormal?" I see the scene of the opening scene. It's not really the opening scene of the movie. It's when things are bad. You've seen things, and all of a sudden the young girl starts quoting scripture, and he will come in on a pale horse, the Pale Rider, and his name is Death. And it is one of the redemption stories that what he wants to do aligns with them. There's something about her and her family that it allows him to, again, get that little tiny crack in where he'll do stuff, but it is very, very supernatural. You really are not certain if he is actually a human being. He could be a specter. He could be death writing. I mean, he is death for the people that oppose him. So I really like that. And then there was another, I think it was made for TV, Purgatory, starring Eric Roberts. And so good. He is the head of a very, very evil. These people have never done anything good for anybody else for any reason ever. Gang that ride into a town and they think that to hide. And they think they're going to take it over, and many, many strange things start happening. And it's very good. And it pulls in Old West people that by this time they're like, "You're dead." And I'm like, yeah. So that's really good. I highly recommend that. If you can find a Purgatory, and again, it stars Eric Roberts. And he does evil, creepy people really, really well. And it's very good. And you have no idea who to root for after a while. So those are my two favorites. I like obviously Wild Wild West, but everybody talked about it. So I'm pulling up the ones nobody mentioned. I can't believe you guys didn't mention either Pale Rider or Purgatory. Jay, in particular, I'm disappointed in you.
Surprised nobody brought up Dark
Pale
Tower
Rider
series
as a
either.
rip on Shane.
See, I don't consider the Dark Tower an actual Western. So we could have that argument, but yeah, that's not a Western to me. That's a horror. That's a setting. The West is a setting. It's not a Western.
That's Stephen King.
I'm just here to start a fight. That's all.
I know.
It's so Wild Wild West, and fist will be flying.
Well, and I mean, with all the things around the West, it's like any other topic. We can just start to scratch the surface. But I know everybody's got at least something we haven't talked about yet, something we haven't covered, something we think needs to be brought up. So, Jean Marie, what's something we have not talked about yet that you think we need to dive into some?
I honestly, there are a lot of things that could be said. There are a lot of discussions of individual characters and individual stories. For example, Briscoe County, the trope of the feisty girl reporter, which actually threads through a number of mediocre Westerns. But I think that for a 1 hour show, we've done pretty good.
Paige?
I would say we haven't talked about the rare, other than Winona Earp, we haven't really talked about the rare Western that has a true female lead. And the one that leaps to mind, as much as the title pisses me off, is Bad Girls,
Mm-hmm.
which had 3 female leads. It was like Charlie's Angels in the West. Andy McDowell and I don't even remember who else. Isn't that awful? But yeah, there are. And then the Sharon Stone movie,
Quick and the Dead.
Quick and the Dead. Quick fun fact. I was living in Tucson at the time that movie was filming, and I made it through 3 rounds of review for casting to be an extra in that movie, but did not get it. So, which made me infinitely sad. But yeah, those rare moments when you get female leads, I don't think we got into that.
Susan?
We're trying to rack my brain over what we might have missed, but it's really coming up that we've covered quite the gambit. Boy, I just can't even recall something right now. There's a lot of new stuff coming out, which I know isn't part of classic Westerns, but there's a lot of really impressive new Western TV shows coming out. One was The English, which I thought was really well done. Again, talking about a strong female character with Emily Blunt, just showing just how hard life really was in those periods, and that it's not just something to reminisce about, but that it is a very hard and unforgiving nature, especially for women, especially for the indigenous people, that there's just so much more that we have swept under the rug. We haven't talked about Dances with Wolves, which is another big Kevin Costner that talked about the plight of the American Indian, and it's really kind of sad that all classic Westerns are not part of that. That's not part of that narrative, and it's kind of just glossed over. But there's so much more we could talk about in that regard as well.
Jenny?
Well, I was going to mention The Quick and the Dead, but Paige beat me to it. I'm going to quickly mention Little Big Man with Dustin Hoffman, which was actually made in the 70s and is one of the rare films of that time that is not showing the Indians as being evil. It's actually historically showing what an absolute murderous idiot Custer was, and so forth. So that's really good. It's making a lot of social commentary along the way. But also one of the things that we didn't talk about, that's as a basic, is that in the time of the West, the East was civilized and the West was completely and utterly barbaric. So, the West, it's saying the West was hard on women and horses. It was. Horses were how you got everywhere. And if you didn't care for them, they were going to drop dead. And women were, either on their backs or breaking their backs trying to keep things going. There weren't a lot of middle ground. So everybody's saying, oh, the dance hall girls, I don't know how to break it to you ladies. That's the most of the women out there, came out to be prostitutes because they had absolutely nothing in the East that they could do. They were too old. They were like 21 and not married. They couldn't have careers. They couldn't do these things. They didn't have families, so they came out. one of the nice things that doesn't get talked about a lot is if you were lucky, and a lot of them were, you married a miner or a rancher or whatever because you were his favorite girl and he hit it big and you got to go be a lady somewhere. There are a lot
of women were they were brought over specifically for that. I mean, one of the best westerns I've ever watched was Wayward, the Wayward Women, which is completely mostly female cast and really impressive of the struggle it took to go over and what they were giving up to what they were going to have to do, which was find a husband in order to survive out there. So I mean, I know it's a trope for being,
but it's real.
It is real. Of course it is. But
the other thing that I wanted to mention is that there's a movie that actually somehow bridges that gap, and it's The Harvey Girls with Judy Garland and Angela Lansbury, because the railroad is what brought civilization. It brought women and it brought clergy. And the Harvey Girls were like that. They were real, and it was real. You had nice young ladies living in a house with a matron, so it was like a dormitory, serving people, and all of a sudden there was a contrast to where all you really had were prostitutes and someone's poor wife, right? And now you have lovely single ladies who are, maybe they're not very pretty, but it doesn't matter because it was like 50 men to one woman. Like, it was worth it to go out and give it a shot. If you could survive, you might do very, very well, and you had a better chance than you did in the civilization. So, and then I'll stop with all the historical accuracies because that is truly and utterly my jam. And Paige, by the way, my novel series set in the Old West, female lead.
Well, we all know that Zorro was a documentary, so
absolutely, and he was devilishly handsome.
All right, Jay. So, what haven't we touched on?
I think that a lot of people believe that the Western is a specific time and place, and that's a strong argument to make. But Westerns exist in every culture. It's why the genre is so easily transferred to other countries that have experienced the same type of colonialism that we exerted on the Old West. If you live in a colonized nation, you understand what it's like to have a superior force come and change your way of life so profoundly. A clash of cultures and ideas, values, technology, and a mismatched technology play very well in any audience, which is why the Western tropes are found in every other genre. I write post-apocalyptic fiction, and if the zombies were anything else, the weather, the environment, the quote unquote savages, it'd be a Western because it's dueling ideas and technology and luxury versus the vast, almost supernatural and sometimes real supernatural wilderness. So this is why if you watch, which is why the spaghetti Western basically took off, because Europe was saying, yeah, we kind of recognize that landscape and how the conquering heroes came in and changed our economies and gave us a better way of life. And why the Russians had their own version, or communist Russian or communist Westerns were prevalent at a certain point in time. So to me, Westerns are about the moral play, the mortality drama, or the morality of two cultures or two ideas clashing, and to discuss how that conflict is either right or wrong. Where in the classic sense, we talk about the righteousness of the highly superior technology and culture of America versus the ennui and the malaise of the spaghetti Western as, yeah, we might have been corrupt this entire time and didn't realize it. That's all I got.
Well, before we roll the streets up, let's make sure everybody knows where to find you guys. Website, social media, and of course, whatever Western somebody might need to pick up of yours. So, Paige.
I'm Paige L. Christie all over the internet. Put the L in there, you'll find me. Not sure when this is dropping, but I'll be at Con Carolinas 2024, and I will be at Multiverse 2024 as far as live appearances. And again, I write Feminist Westerns with Dragons, and the first book is Dragon Weather, the Welsh spelling with an I, Draigon.
Susan?
Find us at clayandsusangriffith.com. You can find us on Facebook, both individually and as the writing team. Just put in Clay and Susan Griffith or Susan Z Griffith and Clay Griffith. We're also on Blue Sky, but not quite as prevalent yet. But and I don't think we're on Twitter, not anymore. Both got new books coming out. But hopefully you'll see them soon.
Jenny?
GiniKoch.com. I'm all over Facebook. If you'd like to sign up for my free newsletter, hook me up. You can do so from my main fan page, Hairspray and Rock and Roll. I'm on X, Twitter, Blue Sky, and Pinterest. Live appearances, because con season, as Paige kind of mentioned, is warming up. I'll be at LibertyCon, San Diego Comic-Con, Gen Con, and Dragon Con this year. And my next release is that novel set in the Old West, Natural Born Outlaws, The Legend of Belladonna, Book 1, by me writing as A.E. Stanton. And that comes out in June from Ginger Blue Publishing.
Jay?
I'm Jay Smith. I'm very lazy on social media, so anything about me is at jsmithaudio.com, including links to hours of free audio drama, full cast, original music, free to download. And if you like that, maybe pick up a couple of my books, because that's how I'm going to end up paying off my student loan after all these years.
Jean Marie?
Good luck with the student loan. I feel you. Anyway, you can find me at I'm Jean Marie Ward just about every place on the net, and JeanMarieWard.com when I fix it. And until then, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, or whatever they're calling it, Blue Sky, Instagram, either as Jean Marie Ward, Facebook, or as Jean_Marie_Ward, everywhere else. And my upcoming release is Dragons, Cats, and Formidable Femmes from Ginger Blue Publishing, coming this summer. And next year, The Adventures of Oleander Jones, who is really no better than she should be, also from Ginger Blue Publishing.
And you can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentialsworkshops.com, creatingpros.com, and of course, your ConTinual. We'll see you again soon.